Tonight we have that fixed. Again, Amelia Strahan explains how a former New Orleans police officer on death row for more than 30 years.
Early one Saturday morning.
Killing a police officer is one of the worst crimes in America. But when the killer is a police officer, and not just any officer, but Antoinette Frank, a young officer who shot and killed her own partner and two innocent people, the betrayal cannot be forgiven. The badge became her disguise for murder. So what happens when the protector becomes the dangerous person? What does the state do when one of its own becomes deadly? This is the case of Antoinette Frank, a death row prisoner for more than 30 years. Welcome to True Crime Matter, where every story we tell is based on facts, filled with truth and harder to forget than you think. Subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with us, because this case is more than murder. It's betrayal in a police uniform. New Orleans, Louisiana, early 1993. The city was desperate. Murder rates were going up fast. Trust in police was at its lowest point. Officers were quitting their jobs faster than the department could hire new ones. The New Orleans Police Department, once thought to be one of the most corrupt in the country, was falling apart from the inside. Murders, drug problems, officers quitting, angry citizens. They needed new officers fast. So when 23-year-old Antoinette Renee Frank applied to join the force, she looked on paper like hope. Young African-American woman, a local person from Laplace Parish, born April 30th, 1971, educated, ambitious. She wasn't just a possible officer, she was a symbol. In a mostly black city filled with racial tension, the NOPD believed officers like Frank could help build trust where it had been broken for so long. But the problems were there from day one. Frank's application was filled with false information. She lied on several sections, including about her education and personal history. Then came the mental health tests, standard procedure for all NOPD recruits. She failed both twice. Dr. Philip Scuria, a psychiatrist hired by the department, gave a clear warning. Do not hire her. His report said that Frank lacked emotional stability, the ability to make decisions, and had a worrying lack of confidence under pressure. She wasn't just a risk. She was the kind of person you don't put in uniform, period. But the NOPD was running out of options. Officers in New Orleans at the time earned much less money than cops in cities like Houston or Atlanta. Morale was at an all-time low. On top of that, an old rule required that all officers live inside city limits, greatly shrinking the number of qualified applicants. That rule wouldn't be lifted until 2014, too late for the damage already done. So, the department did what many broken systems do. They looked the other way. Frank was quietly given a second chance to apply. This time, her application went through easily. On February 7, 1993, she was officially hired. 3 weeks later, on February 28th, she graduated from the academy near the top of her class. From the outside, she looked like a star recruit, but the truth, she was already falling apart. Her fellow officers described her as awkward, emotionally disconnected, and distant. She avoided talking to people. She froze under pressure. Some said she looked like she didn't belong in the uniform at all. In fact, by August 1993, just 6 months into the job, her supervisors were ready to send her back to the academy for more training. One officer said it bluntly. She didn't know how to be a cop. She was watched closely by supervisors often. Whispers grew louder. Was she unstable, unfit, a danger? But while many inside the department had doubts, outside she was being celebrated. Frank received Officer of the Month awards from the local Kiwanis Club. She smiled for photos, shook hands at community events. Her awards painted her as a model cop, a face of change, a story the department could point to. But those awards, they weren't about how well she did her job. They were about public relations. The truth was, Antoinette Frank was already living two lives. One was the uniform, the badge, and the polished smile. The other, darker, hidden, was a growing need for control, violence, and chaos. No one in the department knew it yet. But in less than 2 years, she would walk into a quiet restaurant in New Orleans East, pull out her service weapon, and murder 3 innocent people, including one of their own. And the signs, they had always been there. By early 1994, Officer Antoinette Frank had barely made it through her first year on the force. She was 23, assigned to regular patrols across the New Orleans East District, far from the tourist lights of the French Quarter. Her file was already full of disciplinary notes, failed evaluations, and repeated concerns about her behavior in the field. She was quiet, withdrawn, but no one expected what came next. One night in late 1994, Frank responded to a 911 call near the Desire housing projects, a very dangerous neighborhood off Alvar Street. A young man named Rogers Lacaze had been shot. He was just 18 years old, a smooth-talking street drug dealer with a sharp grin and a growing reputation in New Orleans' drug trade. Frank kneeled beside him in the street. He wasn't dying, just bleeding. And he was charming, some say attractive. It should have been a routine call. But something changed in Frank that night. Some officers believed she saw him as a victim she could save. Others think she saw something darker. A partner, a mirror, someone who didn't care about rules either. Their connection grew fast and dangerously quiet. Within weeks, Lacaze was riding in Frank's personal vehicle. Then he was spotted in her NOPD squad car, even at active crime scenes. Frank told curious officers he was her nephew. Sometimes she said trainee, but the truth was simpler. They were lovers. The relationship was strictly forbidden. Frank didn't care. Despite knowing that Lacaze was a known criminal, despite clear violations of NOPD policy, she kept him close. She introduced him to fellow officers, let him wear parts of her uniform, handed him a badge. She even let him sit in on police questioning sessions. By early 1995, rumors were everywhere and Frank wasn't hiding anymore. Witnesses claimed the pair had begun committing robberies together, using her authority to pull over cars, then shake down drivers for money. One report suggested she flashed her badge while Lacaze brandished a weapon, an illegal Tech-9 pistol. But the most disturbing incident came just weeks before the massacre. In February 1995, Frank and Lacaze were seen leaving a party together on the West Bank. On the drive home, they allegedly pulled over two young men. A fight broke out. Lacaze pulled the Tech-9 and pointed it at them. A civil sheriff driving by stopped, shocked to see a cop standing calmly beside an armed man. Frank didn't take the gun from Lacaze. She didn't arrest him. She stood up for him. "He's the good guy," she told the deputy. "It's under control." No charges were filed. No report made. The story disappeared inside the NOPD. Some tried to sound the alarm again. Frank's behavior was unpredictable. Her connection to a violent suspect wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous, but it didn't matter. New Orleans was still short-staffed. Officers were stretched thin, and complaints about Frank never seemed to stick. So she stayed on the street, gun on her hip, Lacaze in her car, and a storm building just beneath the surface. Because by March 1995, the two were planning something bigger. They knew the Kim Anh Vietnamese restaurant well on Bullard Avenue in New Orleans East. Frank worked off-duty security there. The Vu family paid her in cash. They trusted her. They even gave her a key, and she had just one question on her mind. How much money was in that building? It was a quiet Friday night in New Orleans East, the kind of night where the air hangs heavy with humidity and silence. Located at 3800 block of Bullard Avenue just off Interstate 10, the Kim Anh Vietnamese restaurant had closed for the evening. The Vu family, hard-working immigrants from Vietnam, were cleaning up as they did every night. Ha Vu, 24, and her younger brother, Quang Vu, just 17, were mopping floors, wiping tables, and getting ready to lock up. In the kitchen, their older sister, Cho Vu, 23, tucked the day's cash into a microwave, a regular hiding spot no one outside the family was supposed to know, but someone did. That someone had a key. Antoinette Frank, now 24 years old and still an active duty officer with the New Orleans Police Department, had worked off-duty security at Kim Anh for months. The Vus had trusted her, called her part of the family. They even paid her in cash for private patrol shifts to keep the restaurant safe in the crime-filled neighborhood. They never imagined she'd use her badge to rob them or worse. Earlier that night, Frank had already come by twice with Rogers Lacaze, now 18, in tow. They claimed they were hungry, grabbed leftover food, joked around, but something in Frank's behavior felt off. Jo Vu noticed it. She told her siblings she had a bad feeling. Something was wrong. Then, just after 1:30 a.m., Frank came back a third time. This time she came alone, except she wasn't. Lacaze followed close behind, armed with a 9mm handgun, later identified as a Taurus PT-92. Frank used her stolen key to unlock the back door and let them both inside. Officer Ronald A. Williams II, 25, was on duty that night too, working the same private security detail Frank once held. A proud NOPD patrolman, Williams was well-liked, respected, and most importantly, not in on the plan. He didn't know he was about to be attacked by one of his own. As Williams moved through the dining area, He caught sight of Lacaze stepping from the shadows. The first bullet struck him in the neck. He collapsed instantly, paralyzed. The second shot hit him in the back. The third right in the head, execution style. The shooter, Rogers Lacaze. The accomplice, Antoinette Frank. And the motive, money, control, chaos. In the chaos, Frank stormed into the kitchen. She found Ha Vu, Quang Vu, and a terrified kitchen worker. She forced them into the walk-in cooler. Then she turned to Quang and demanded the money. He didn't know where it was. She hit him with her gun, screamed, threatened. Still no answer. Eventually, she opened the microwave and found over $10,000 in cash, tips, savings, and payroll. And then she raised her gun and shot Ha Vu 3 times. Then she turned and fired 6 bullets into Quang Vu, killing him on the spot. The third worker, terrified and silent, managed to hide in the shadows. So did Xiao Vu, crouched and shaking in the cooler, heart racing. She knew the killer. She knew her name. She'd eaten dinner with her. Now she was watching her murder her siblings. And then just as fast as they came, Frank and Lacaze left, disappeared into the darkness. But the nightmare wasn't over. March 4th, 1995. Roughly 2:10 a.m. in New Orleans East. The streets were quiet. But inside the Kim Anh Vietnamese restaurant on Bullard Avenue, the silence was soaked in blood. 3 people were dead. Officer Ronald A. Williams II, 25, shot 3 times in the dining area. His body still in uniform, badge on his chest, service weapon untouched in its holster. Ha Vu, 24, killed with 3 close-range bullets after begging for her life. Quang Vu, just 17 years old, shot down with 6 shots to the chest and torso. But 2 witnesses had survived. Xiao Vu, 23, and a frightened restaurant employee whose name was later kept secret for protection. They had hidden inside the walk-in freezer, crouched in darkness, listening to their siblings being murdered just feet away. They waited. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, Chow crawled from the cooler and slipped out the back, barefoot and shaking. She ran across the neighboring lot and banged on a nearby door, screaming for help. At 2:15 a.m., a 911 call was placed from a house next to Kim Anh. The report was shocking. Officer down, triple homicide, suspect fled. But no one, not even the dispatcher, could have predicted what would happen next. Just minutes later, Antoinette Frank returned to the crime scene. She wasn't in regular clothes. She wasn't hiding. She came back wearing her full New Orleans Police Department uniform, badge shining, pistol holstered. She had borrowed a marked squad car from another officer and pulled up like she was just another first responder on the scene. Frank walked straight through the back entrance of the restaurant, the same door she had used to enter during the robbery. Her gun was still with her, her face calm. She was there to kill again, to finish what she and Lacaze had started. 2 witnesses were still alive. She needed them gone, but fate had other plans. Just as Frank entered the building, Xiao Vu, still panicked and shaking, spotted her from the front of the restaurant. Her scream pierced the silence. She did it. That's her. She shot my brother and sister. Chow didn't hesitate. She ran into the arms of a real NOPD officer, pointing directly at Frank in uniform. Frank froze. She tried to play it cool, claimed she didn't know what was happening, said she had just arrived. She even began investigating the scene, pretending to check for survivors. But Chow wouldn't back down. She kept shouting her name over and over. That's Antoinette. She's the one who killed them. Real officers at the scene were stunned. They knew Frank. She was one of them. But within seconds, their confusion gave way to cold, sick realization. A fellow cop had murdered another officer and civilians and was now pretending to be a responder to cover her tracks. She was immediately detained. Her gun was taken, her uniform searched, her story fell apart. By 3 a.m., Antoinette Frank was in custody. Later that morning, detectives picked up Rogers Lacaze at a friend's apartment. He was wearing Officer Williams's department-issued wristwatch and had used the slain officer's Chevron gas card just an hour earlier. The evidence was piling up fast, but no one knew, not yet, that the darkest part of Frank's story hadn't even been discovered. Because less than a year later, a neighbor's dog would start digging under her house. And what it found would change everything. When Antoinette Renee Frank, a sworn officer with the New Orleans Police Department, was arrested on March 4, 1995, for the brutal murder of 3 people, it sent shockwaves across Louisiana. A police officer, one of their own, not only involved in a robbery and triple homicide, but also accused of killing a fellow officer in uniform. This wasn't just a crime, it was a crisis of faith. The people of New Orleans, already tired from police scandals and department corruption, couldn't believe it. The headlines didn't make sense. NOPD officer accused in massacre. Teen drug dealer and policewoman charged with triple murder. Citizens watched in disbelief as local news showed mugshots of 24-year-old Officer Antoinette Frank and her boyfriend, 18-year-old Rogers Lacaze, a known street dealer with a violent past. And inside the NOPD, silence, embarrassment, rage. Frank had slipped through their hiring system after lying on her application, failing mental health exams, and earning whispered complaints from fellow officers. Now she was in handcuffs facing 3 counts of first-degree murder. The question on everyone's mind, would Louisiana finally hold one of its own responsible? Both Frank and Lacaze were charged by an Orleans Parish grand jury in the months following their arrest. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage and 911 timelines placed them at the scene. A .38 caliber Taurus PT-92 recovered from Lacaze matched the bullets in Officer Williams's body. Frank's fingerprints were found inside the Kim Anh restaurant on the microwave where the money had been hidden. And most damning of all, surviving witness Chovu had pointed directly at Frank, screaming to officers, "She killed my brother and sister." She shot the officer too. The city held its breath. In July 1995, Rogers Lacaze was tried first. He showed little regret. His decision to use Officer Williams's Chevron gas card just minutes after the murders left no doubt about his involvement. Within days, the jury found him guilty on all charges and returned a death sentence. But it was Frank's trial in October that drew the biggest crowd. The courtroom was packed with reporters, retired officers, victims' families, and civilians who had once trusted her badge. Held in the criminal district court for Orleans Parish, Frank's trial began under tight security. District Attorney Harry Connick Sr., father of the famous musician, led the prosecution team with careful precision. The state didn't need drama. They had evidence and witnesses. Chovu took the stand and told in terrible detail how Frank forced her family into the kitchen, demanded money, and killed her siblings. Forensic experts tied bullet casings to Frank's personal weapon. Her attempt to return to the crime scene as a responding officer was described as a bold effort to kill remaining witnesses and control the investigation. And yet, despite the stakes, Frank's defense team fumbled. They had called 39 witnesses but presented none. They didn't argue trauma. They didn't paint her as a manipulated woman. They barely fought. To observers, it looked like surrender. When the jury finally rose to think it over, you could hear the stillness in the courtroom. No one even touched their coffee. Reporters prepared for a long night, but it only took 22 minutes, a record for a capital murder verdict in the city of New Orleans. Frank stood emotionless as the jury leader read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The next day, after only 45 more minutes, the jury recommended the death penalty. On October 20th, 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to die by lethal injection. She was immediately transferred to the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, becoming the only woman on Louisiana's death row at the time. And as the steel doors slammed shut behind her, everyone assumed that was it. Justice had been served. The case was over. But it wasn't, because months later, under the floorboards of a simple home in Gentilly, a neighbor's dog began to dig. And what it uncovered beneath Antoinette Frank's old house was another body, one no one had been looking for. In the Gentilly neighborhood just off Congress Drive, a neighbor of Frank's former house noticed her dog scratching constantly beneath the raised wooden frame of the empty home. At first, it was dismissed as normal behavior. Then the dog dragged something out, a human skull. Detectives with the NOPD Homicide Division were called in immediately. They secured the property and began a controlled dig beneath the house. What they found buried in a shallow, unmarked grave chilled even experienced investigators. A complete human skeleton, torn clothing consistent with casual menswear, and one unmistakable detail, a gunshot wound to the back of the skull, execution style. Within days, investigators matched the remains to a 1993 missing persons report filed by Antoinette Frank herself. The man reported missing, her own father, Adam Frank, a former U.S. Army veteran. According to the original report, Antoinette claimed Adam had left the house and never returned. There was no follow-up investigation, no media coverage, just a form and a lie. Now his body had been found buried beneath the floorboards of the same home Antoinette lived in, when she first applied to the New Orleans Police Department. It didn't take long for investigators to draw their conclusions. Antoinette Frank didn't just kill her partner. She didn't just kill two innocent restaurant workers. She murdered her own father and lived on top of his grave. In later mental health evaluations done during her time on death row, Frank finally opened up about her childhood. She described Adam Frank as abusive, violent, and controlling. She claimed he had sexually assaulted her, physically beat her, and controlled every corner of her life. A psychologist who interviewed her wrote, "She buried her rage where no one could see it until it exploded." Despite this, prosecutors never charged her for the murder of Adam Frank. When asked why, one investigator said, "She's already on death row. What more do you want? Another trial?" But others weren't so sure. To them, this was the first kill, and everything that followed, the lies, the manipulation, the murders, was built on top of that one terrible secret. It's been 30 years since the bloodshed at Kim Anh restaurant shocked Louisiana. Today, Antoinette Frank is 54 years old. She's still behind bars at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, still awaiting the state's final word. But in 2023, a political shift gave death row inmates across Louisiana new hope. Then Governor John Bel Edwards publicly opposed the death penalty, urging state officials to reconsider all active death row cases. In response, 56 of 57 inmates, including Frank, filed clemency petitions. They were all denied, but Frank wasn't done yet. In April 2025, her attorneys filed a motion to overturn her sentence, citing her history of childhood trauma, mental health problems, and ineffective legal defense during her original trial. And the court listened. On May 15, 2025, a judge approved a new sentencing hearing for Antoinette Frank. It's scheduled for December 2025. That hearing will decide everything. Whether she's granted clemency and her death sentence is lifted, or whether Louisiana finally carries out the execution that's been delayed for 3 decades. Either way, the clock is ticking, and the woman once trusted to serve and protect may finally face the justice she's outrun for far too long. If you think justice should be served, comment execution. If you believe trauma should offer redemption, comment clemency. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that dig deep beneath the surface, just like this one. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and never forget, evil can wear a badge.